some of the things he is not looking for a theory of everything. That's a little bit far-fetched. But what I understood after reading his first books, I was totally annoyed because he makes statement after statement without proof. But then I said, man, this guy is so stricken by illness, so maybe we release him from the proof of his statements. And then I threw the book away. And I got it again after a few months because I understood what Steve Hawkins is. He is a modern John. And that's why I listened to him again.
What particular book was that?
The Short History of Time was the first one. And then the Hawkins radiation went back and forth, and it didn't surprise me because I'm in particle physics, so that some antiparticles escape didn't surprise me from that point of view. So I think he's a great man, and he is a modern Joe.
What do you mean by modern Joe?
That means he is in constant fight with his God. And like Jacob, he has some wounds.
I think it's interesting that your take as a PhD in physics, as a layperson, I've done some reading of his The Grand Design, and I love Dr. John Lennox's critique of that, because in the intro to The Grand Design, Stephen Hawking says that philosophy is, and this is a paraphrase, but philosophy is dead because it just hasn't kept up with science. And Dr. Lennox is very quick to point out, doesn't the man realize that is a philosophical statement? So it really kind of, from a layman's perspective, I could see some issues with some of his reasoning, but it's interesting to hear from a physicist,
I think what he does is all right. He doesn't have the time and the energy for long proofs.
Alex, anything come to your mind as you?
Honestly, the only thing was really what you had just mentioned, and that in trying to escape philosophy or trying to escape the muddling of a creator, they're in fact just, and I speak kind of just about the generic atheist physicist, but they are binding themselves in a philosophy and in these things, and it's almost as if they willingly turn a blind eye towards that, and that's kind of a broad statement, but it strikes me that a lot of times there are underlying philosophies that just aren't recognized openly.
Well, I think that's an interesting point too about philosophy in general, because we can't have a conversation without invoking philosophy, because the definition of a word is philosophical. So it's pretty hard to communicate. Logic. We can't have a conversation without logic. That's definitely within the realm of philosophy. Any other thoughts or comments, questions?
Ask questions, please. Hard ones, if possible.
Did anyone actually watch the movie? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know what's funny? I had seen this one, and I had bought a bunch of Christian movies, just the regular movies. They're not about Christianity necessarily. And I bought a movie called The Theory of Everything, which is about a physicist who is trying to, come up with this unifying theory, and in the end he comes to faith. That one was more of a Christian theme. And then 3 weeks ago, I was at a used bookstore and picked up, I can't think of the author's name, a book called The Theory of Everything. So it's a subject that I've definitely have thought a lot about. And again, and this isn't to minimize who and what God is, but so it's not to say that all of God is that He is the theory of everything, but I do believe that anything that we can possibly think of he is the explanation for it. Let's put it that way.
Maybe I can argue with you, because I think God is bigger than that. The best theory we ever could develop would explain 3 dimensions in time. Are we sure that God is constrained in our dimensions? I don't think so.
No, I wouldn't think that he is at all. In fact, I think philosophy would argue against that very fact.
The philosophy, meanwhile, I agree with Hawkins, is dead since the uncertainty of relation. Because
Schrödinger?
not Schrödinger, Heisenberg. Heisenberg, and he, by the way, also tried a world formula already some 40 years ago, which he withdrew. So this is not new, the attempt to do this. But so far it always failed. And that's good, because otherwise we couldn't close up.
Well,
But this dimensional argument has gotten some very, very new twist. With people who are thinking about black holes where the time stops. Black holes have an event horizon. That means once you pass that, you're gone. In the timeless domain where causality also fails. All right, I don't know whether that is in Christian belief where you get later in a different way. But somebody had now the idea, what happens if the Platonic parabola of the guy who sees the shadows?
okay.
You know that I think is one of the deepest philosophical thoughts I'm aware of. Shall I repeat the story, or you know it?
Plato.
It might be good
Okay.
to repeat it.
The criminal gets convicted and chained to the blackboard there. And on the floor there's light, people walk by and talk and argue and display their logic. And what he sees is only their shadows at the wall. After being 20 years chained there, he believes these people argue, they talk, and everything they do, he can see. So that's the real world. Footnote, he was missing the 3rd dimension. He only saw the shadows. Now, sit tight. I'm not teaching that. If you consider there is one more dimension which we don't have a sense for. And the event horizon around this black hole in this higher dimensional space is a sphere, which in this case is 3-dimensional with time. So it could be that we are sitting in the event horizon of a higher dimension. That's meanwhile very mind-boggling. But, you know, it is a possibility because we are living in a universe which is poked by black holes. In the middle of our galaxy is a big one. It was recently measured to contain, what was it, 4.2 billion solar masses or something like that. And that's where the time stops, and close to it, it eats up everything. All right, so we are far enough that it will not eat us in our lifetime. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So we should be very, very careful to say what we know and the formula which contains everything which nobody can express in the present moment for the black holes. So I don't believe in the theory of everything, period. From our perspective. It is only the theory of everything we are acquainted with.
Very subjective. Entirely subjective.
Yeah, we are caught in our three-dimensional world at the time, which we don't understand. Yes.
Yeah.
So in the video, the Reverend suggested that like the fact that Hawking is looking for this theory of everything, or this theory to like solve everything somehow, to explain how we came about, kind of a thing. He said that points to the underlying thought that he thinks there's intelligent design. Like there has to be intelligent design to like
There's
have
a
that
rationality to
like
it.
there's an order to things, and it had to be like made that way by something intelligent. So what do you think, if Hawking was sitting in the room and he heard that just now, what do you think his counter to that would be?
I haven't heard him to comment on this very new idea about a singularity in a higher dimensional space. This is brand new, and I still keep up because space experiments and so forth. That's fine. I don't know what his answer really would be. What he has done so far was, he was for a short time Christian, then he tried to invent a theory such that no creator is necessary from the boundary conditions. And that's what he is working at, but hasn't succeeded with. That's what I know.
What do you mean from the boundary conditions?
You had calculus, right? There are
In high school.
equations which are terrible, and they only have solutions if you take the boundary conditions into account. If you have a theory of everything, and the boundary condition is God, you've had it.
There are no boundaries on the theory of everything.
That's what he is trying to prove without success so far. He is finding something in opposition to God.
How is he different from Job?
Because Job, after a long time, came back. He argued with his friends, and they made all kinds of suggestions which were not reasonable. Now Hawkins argues with the scientific community. There's a parallel.
His friends are arguing.
Yes. So, in the end, Job got to grace again. And Steve,
We don't
There's
know
still
the end
time
of,
left.
we don't know the end of, is he dead?
No, there's still time left.
There is still, yeah, I was gonna, yeah, once again. it's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
I respect him very highly. I wouldn't attack him that he is a time in between an atheist after being stricken down so much.
Do you think he's fundamentally a man of integrity?
Yes, what does he have to lose?
Just curious what your perception of it.
Yeah, so I think I would kind of answer that more by answering your question. I think, now of course this is really just my personal speculation, but I think that what's going on in a situation like we've been introduced to here is a separation of the heart and the mind, and where the heart is striving for something. And we know that, you know, humanity has this very natural striving for God. And in his case, his mind, as you point out, maybe his sufferings, maybe the equations that he's chasing down, because in his mind, I'm sure, what he sees are just a series of equations that he can do better on. And he's just kind of following and iterating further down the line. And he sees it almost as an optimization. But what drives that optimization? Why does he care? And I think it comes down to, he does have an integrity, and he does have something driving him, but there's been kind of a hiccup along the way. and whether that's his disease, whether that's pain, whether that's any number of things he's been introduced to, something that would maybe otherwise manifest as him striving for God in a theological sense, has turned into him striving for almost an explanation of God in a very physical sense. And that's the way he kind of pushes it.
I don't know, definitely don't know specifically what Stephen Hawking would say, though I suspect his answer might be similar to what I think other I wouldn't even say physicists, but science over faith kind of people would say, is that maybe it's just a brute fact. The rationality is just a brute fact. There is no explanation for it. It just is. And the reason I say that he may say that is because I think that's very similar to the argument that he makes in the Grand Design, that given the laws of nature, the universe would create itself. So in some ways, I think he is arguing there that existence of the universe is a brute fact. Again, I don't know specifically, but I think that there are a lot of people. I know. Trying to think of, is it George Smith wrote the book Atheism? When he discusses morality, that's the track that he takes. One of my great quests is to try and nail down a atheistic explanation for morality, because I think they have a tremendous grounding issue in why there's any morality. So in study that I've done with that, I believe it's George Smith is the one that, morality is just a brute fact. It just is. That's just what we do. So I don't know, but I would think that maybe many physicists or many people that are against science over faith would say that some of these things are just brute facts.
See, but I would tend to counter with, if it is a brute fact, why do we care? I think a lot of times, just because it's a brute fact that we can't explain something, doesn't necessarily, even in my own research, there are a lot of things that I see, I could go off and explain that. And usually the response from my professor or from my peers is, why do you care? What are you going to get from it? And so I think in the fact that even if they do believe it's just a brute fact, why don't they fall into this pit of existentialist depression? Why don't they say, there's no meaning, it's nothing, we're just going to turn to dust? And I come back to it. It's something about the heart striving to grab onto something, and these are the only threads that they know.
I think it's C.S. Lewis, who others I'm sure have as well, but C.S. Lewis talked about how the very fact that man universally, not universally to the person, but to the culture, seeks God, seeks religion. And why would a person strive and seek for something that can't possibly be satisfied? I think that's kind of similar to what you're saying. There's an innate hole in us that people try and fill with some sort of a religion. And over the course of human history, there's been numerous things they've tried to fill that hole. Why are they trying to fill a hole? What hunger could a human possibly have that natural existence doesn't provide a satisfaction for?
I think you should put your question to Steve Hawkins. He may enjoy
Yeah, call him up.
No. He visited our space experiment before it was launched. He is interested. Very much so. He is one of the most intense seekers that I have met in my life. And when he asked for integrity, I think he is integer. He is genuinely searching. In the present moment, he is a strong opponent of what we say, but he is really strongly searching.
So I'm thinking as a pastoral question, how much his own expression, I'm not sure of the movie because I've not seen it, and how much of the movie is true and how much is fanciful. But my question is, and we've mentioned it already, how much is his physical challenge and illness and disease and terribleness impacted him? And both of you have said, in some ways that would have some relation. So being like a Job, and then you said something of what could drive you toward a search for God, and I don't know if each of you have ever had suffering, probably different ones of us. So if you have some kind of chronic disease, if you have some kind of loss, whether it's physical disease or mental health issues. I'm also thinking about the movie now with Alzheimer's, whatever her name is, Julianne
John Nash.
Moore, I think, I'm someone that, well, that's another one.
Oh.
Someone that's showing us what it's like to have Alzheimer's, and she's like 50 years old. If you dealt with something like that, it can drive you in different ways. And so for someone of his intense physical challenge, how has that really impacted him? I'm wondering in terms of being a seeker. So that's kind of one question that I'm curious about. And the other one is just the overall search for truth. And if he's an intense seeker, when you said that, did you mean an intense seeker of truth and wanting to really know? And he doesn't have necessarily, well, I don't know, probably does have assumptions and presuppositions, just like people of faith do as well, many times. So if he's a true seeker, isn't it true that someone could be a true seeker from the scientific, let's say, worldview, but then you can also be someone who's a true seeker from a faith perspective and believing in God view? And I was reminded of the conversation yesterday that they're almost, it looks like they're opposing forces, but because each is capable of better understanding, like let's say, better understanding of Genesis, or perhaps an understanding of Genesis, and then from the science view, the always continued revising of hypotheses or theories, so that it seems like you're on a collision course, but that his search for truth, or someone who's a person of faith, is going to end up in the same place. We're just not sure. I don't know if that makes any sense. We're not sure if that's going to end up in the same place. So is he a real seeker of truth? And then the question, I have a lot of questions, is all truth God's truth? You know, everybody that asks that.
Well, I see it from the following way. For each insight you gain, you should gain a doubt. So your path to faith is the same, whether or not you have no intellectual advantage. Because God created all of us, dumb, logical or not logical. And therefore He loves us all. And therefore, for each insight, you always try to get an insight so you are better, right? That doesn't work. That's contrary to faith. The path should be the same. I had a hard mother. She said there is no cheap grace.
Yeah.
My question, I guess, is about, so there are believers who would try to take the traditional, from like a long time ago, evangelical approach to faith, which is that faith is a matter of the heart and of the soul, and your mind doesn't need to enter into it at all, because that's not what it's about. And then there are people who take the approach of trying to look at faith and find proof and explain all of it through reason and evidences. And you know, as an apologist, or just as a scientist and a Christian at the same time, how do you walk the line and find the space between where you're saying that our mind and our reason is a gift of God and we should be using it, but still recognizing that reason is not the same as faith, and we shouldn't try to substitute one for the other in either direction?
Well, I think God is so great that He allows us to make scientific progress. But at the same time, He does not leave the others behind. I don't know whether that answers your question. You see, if you look, I have this book there from Mr. Margenau, who asked all the Nobel Prize winners and some other people, including me, shortly before he died, what the take was on this kind of things. And you got very diverse answers. But my reading is that each path to faith should require the same energy. You cannot get an intellectual advantage because he is so much bigger than you are.
I think sometimes the intellectual capability can be a disadvantage.
Yes, that if the doubts come more than the insights, yes.
Or if we begin to think we're smarter than we really are.
But think about the following. How would you react to somebody who is much more intelligent than you? And you know it. There's two things. Either you believe him or you reject him. Right? And that's the situation we are in.
One more question back here?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked what you mentioned earlier about our theories can really only encompass 3 dimensions and time, for example. So then it would seem kind of like scientific study and spirituality are entirely orthogonal. But do you think that's true? And how do you think God feels about scientific progress?
Joe, would you repeat the question for the client?
No.
Maybe you should speak louder. Try again. I don't think
Let's record this.
Please.
So do you think that scientific study and spirituality are orthogonal? And then a separate question is, what do you think how do you think God feels about scientific progress? Does he bless it? Is he just indifferent?
Well,
Anti-science.
Is God an agnostic?
if you ask me personally, I say God is so great that he even allows us to look over his shoulder into the creation. So,
How about
no
the question
problem.
specifically of science and faith being
I don't see
oppositional?
I don't see the opposition there, unless there is one thing which is built in the human beings. I want to be right. If you want to be right, watch out. Otherwise, I see no contradiction. You see, whenever somebody argues with me about my faith or non-faith or or whatever it is, in principle, he thinks he is right. But how does he know he's right? How do I know I'm right? Maybe I'm wrong all the time here.
You have to say that's a possibility.
It's a
Right?
possibility,
I'm wrong.
but we shouldn't insist. And I see the whole thing between science and faith. I don't see it. I don't see a foundation for this fight. It's just if somebody says, well, in my evidence, I want evidence. I'm an engineer. I want to see evidence for this. Okay. Then, what is he saying? I'm right. It doesn't fit my logic. I want. Okay. Does he deserve an answer? That's the principal question.
I like what Thomas Aquinas said. Faith and reason you know, it goes back to your thing about is all truth God's truth. He said all truth is God's truth. There can never be a contradiction between faith and reason. If there appears to be a contradiction, it's because we're interpreting one of them wrong. You know, the facts of nature, whatever the truth is real, it's true. That doesn't mean we interpret it right. Whatever the Scripture says, by faith, that's true. I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. That doesn't mean I'm an inerrant interpreter. It doesn't mean that I get it right all the time. And so, you know, I think Aquinas was brilliant in that regard of reconciling that, you know, all truth is God's truth. If there's something that appears to be contradictory, it's in our understanding of it, not in the facts of the matter.
Our choice is reason without faith, right? 3 choices, I think. Reason without faith, faith without reason, or faith that's
Reasonable faith.
supported by faith supported by reason. So even Augustine saying faith isn't considered to be in opposition to reason, but it's an essential partner to what we know. Or the opposite of what many of our friends, probably at MIT, say, that those who are people of faith have blind faith, when I'm not sure anybody in this room would say they have blind faith, but instead they have informed understanding that leads us to trust further or take that next step, if you will. So of these 3 choices, I think the scientist is looking for evidence. The person of faith who's following Christ, I don't think is just following blindly, as if faith has nothing to do with evidence. But it's looking at the same evidence in a different way. I don't know if a chaplain's allowed to read a Bible verse at this point, but that Romans 1 passage has been coming to my mind, and just one verse about how God makes things plain to us. And verse 20, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power, His divine nature have been clearly seen and being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they or we have known God, they or we have neither glorified Him as God nor give thanks to Him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Is negative there at the end.
Yeah.
But it's...
And I think that's a critical point. We're going to transition now to bring up our key speaker for the evening. Many of you know him already. Gideon Lee was born and raised in Hong Kong. He came to the United States in 1989 and received a BS from MIT, an SB? From MIT in 1993, majoring in computer science. He's been a programmer since he was 12 and got a clone of the Apple II computer. Professionally, he's made many contributions in software collaboration of Lotus Notes, Centra, Java Application Server, Silverstream. As a hobby, I think this is interesting. He is interested in immersive media, partly growing out of his undergraduate research experience at the Interactive Cinema Group at the Media Lab, where he did his thesis. Gideon also serves as a bivocational, as a minister of the gospel. After helping the Hong Kong students Bible study group at MIT get started in the early 90s, he then helped with the planting of a Chinese church at CIBC near Northeastern University in 1994. He served with CIBC for 10 years while attending seminary, received his MDiv from Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary in 2000, and has recently gone back to school after having been away for a few years, and is now working toward his PhD in apologetics and worldview at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And there his primary research interest is on the problem of evil in secular humanistic worldviews, with an emphasis on Christian philosopher Francis Schaeffer. And I think that's specifically, some of the things he's going to talk about tonight is the apologetics of